Okay, so here we are again, looking at developmental gaps that trauma habits leave open. And I'm going to work through the same slide we were in before using that BuzzFeed poll. This time I'm going to look at the habit that we were talking about before. I'm going to identify the developmental gap. We're going to talk about what it might look like when it's healed and what is the triggered response that you want to focus on in order to apply the 6 steps to heal from this trauma habit. So number 1, remaining neutral. The developmental gap is being able to know what you need and stand up for yourself. If this trauma response is healed, then you develop the ability to have opinions, speak up, and set boundaries. Those are developmental steps that can be just as hard as for a baby taking first steps. The triggered response that you're going to look for to be able to work on healing this trauma response is noticing opportunities to speak up when you are afraid and don't want to speak up. Next one, hyperindependence is when you think that everything is great. You think that that's a great habit until you realize it's born out of trauma where you couldn't rely on caregivers. The developmental gap is not being able to get comfort from other people or to accept help. When it's healed, it might look like asking for help, trusting yourself, and trusting others. Because we can't trust other people if we don't trust ourselves to be able to know who's trustworthy and who's not. So the decision to do it alone, to feel like you have to take care of things by yourself, is a triggered response that you want to look for so you can apply the 6 steps. The next habit, not being able to stand abrupt, loud noises. The gap is the ability to self-soothe or self-regulate. That's what the gap is. The ability to learn to self-soothe and self-regulate comes when we have parents who are good enough at taking care of our needs. We learn how to do that when things bother us or we get upset when we're kids. So abrupt, loud noises, those kinds of things. We learn how to soothe ourselves and self-regulate and realize that that thing outside of us isn't going to hurt us. How does it look if it's healed? That would be the ability to remain calm with loud noises in this specific situation. And the triggered response that you look for to focus on when you're wanting to apply the 6 steps would be that startle response. Next habit, parents wondering why you're single and never date. And it's because the best way to cope is to withdraw. The developmental gap is, again, the ability to get comfort from and to accept help from other people or to make friends. If that's healed, it might look like being able to meet new people and determine who is safe and who isn't safe, so you can choose when to engage and when to withdraw. The triggered response that you would want to use to focus on is the decision to withdraw. Next habit is never having a negative answer, being okay with everything, never really considering how you feel about things. That is the developmental ability to set boundaries and advocate for yourself. When that's healed, it might look like being able to identify and verbalize your needs, your wants, your likes, your dislikes, and know that they matter. The triggered response that you would look for if this was your habit was feeling yourself going with the flow instead of speaking up. Next habit is eating a lot. And the developmental gap is being able to tell the difference between hunger and uncomfortable emotions. When you're healed, you know that you're eating to fulfill biological hunger. So when you want to heal it, you look for the trigger response, you watch for overeating or eating without hunger, so that you can use that to focus on your thoughts when you're trying to work through the 6 steps. Next habit is being defensive about expressing emotions and feelings, having to minimize your feelings. And the gap with that person who's doing this hasn't developed the ability to self-soothe and self-advocate about their feelings. So healing this may look like being able to expressing feelings. Healing, when this is healed, it might look like being able to express your feelings without worry. So the trigger response that you're going to look for is feeling defensive and shutting yourself down. Next habit is reading other people's behavior, paying attention to footsteps, tone, and expressions. The developmental gap is setting and maintaining emotional boundaries, right? Realizing that if other people are having problems in their tone or expression, it's their problem, not yours. So when this is healed, it might look like allowing other people to feel what they feel without trying to interfere and keeping yourself safe, setting boundaries so you can do that. So how do you know what to look for to heal this one? Look for your triggered response being worried about other people's behaviors. Next one, having people feel extremely calm around me turned out to be a trauma response. So it's helping make sure everybody else is comfortable and at peace. The developmental gap is allowing other people to experience distress without you having to jump into action. So if that's healed, you're going to let people feel what they feel. The triggered response would be that you're looking for to heal would be when you find yourself worrying about other people's feelings, you know that this trauma habit may be activated. Next one is shutting down emotionally because of emotional abandonment in childhood. That developmental gap is feeling and expressing your emotions. If this were healed, you would have the ability to feel, express, and modulate your emotions. So you'd be able to tolerate emotions and distract yourself appropriately. So when you want to heal this, look for a triggered response of experiencing shutdown or numbness to give yourself a clue that it's time to work on the 6 steps. The next habit, taking responsibility for other people's emotions. The developmental gap here is setting and maintaining emotional boundaries so you can take care of yourself and let other people feel what they feel. And that's what it looks like when it's healed, allowing other people to feel what they feel and keeping yourself safe. So that means that if other people are feeling something that causes them to behave in unsafe ways, you can excuse yourself. You can set boundaries to make sure you're safe. And how do you know that this trauma habit is showing up? Because you notice you're worrying about other people's feelings. Next one is crying from conflict. So crying when we're talking about honest feelings or opinions, having difficulty stopping and feeling safe expressing feelings means that there's a lack of development in the area of self-soothing and advocating for yourself. If this were healed, you'd allow yourself to express your feelings calmly. So how do you know what to look for when you're ready to heal this trauma habit? Is when you're crying, when you're talking about your feelings, that's time to start looking at the 6 steps, with crying when talking being the trigger response. Next habit is being an empath, where you feel other people's feelings and making them feel better makes you feel better. That, again, is setting and maintaining emotional boundaries. You have not learned how to do that, and that's a developmental skill. If it's healed, you're going to allow other people to feel what they feel, and you're going to be able to keep yourself safe. How do you know what the triggered response is that you're going to look for so that you can start working the 6 steps? It's when you find yourself worrying about others' feelings. Next one, crying when I witness kindness and understanding. Problem with this is the self-talk is probably not positive, and there's probably a problem with self-esteem. Those are developmental tasks. So self-esteem is the combination of knowing that you're loved and knowing that you're good at something. And so when this is a deficit of knowing that you're lovable, that usually comes from negative messages that happened when we were kids from parents who were abusive. And so this would be where you would focus on identifying the messages you're saying to yourself that are negative that came probably from a parent, and correcting those using the 6 steps. Healing this, that knowing that it's healed, evidence is that you would know you're good and you're lovable. But the triggered response that you're looking for, so that you know you should work on this using the 6 steps, would be finding yourself unable to trust when people do loving things toward you, or if you're finding yourself putting yourself down a lot. The next one is getting anxious when people are super kind. So again, this is the same thing. But this one, the triggered response that you would be watching for is noticing that you're unable to trust loving actions or putting yourself down. Next one is double checking, screenshotting, doubting your own memory, opinions, and self because you've been gaslit. So children learn through exploring to trust themselves. And because this person had a mom who encouraged this person not to trust their own perceptions, they did not develop the ability to trust themselves. Healed, this might look like being able to maintain your position even when other people disagree. And how would you know what to look for? Your triggered response would be paying attention when you start doubting what you know or what you feel. Next one is confidently saying sorry and thinking I did something wrong. That developmental gap is the ability to self-soothe. So they're missing that. And if it's healed, it may look like seeing mistakes as a learning opportunity. The triggered response you want to look for is apologizing and thinking you did something wrong. I know that I'm moving through these fairly rapidly, but this is the 3rd time we're going through them. So if you want to really study and think it through, or if you have questions about any of these that I'm just going through so quickly, then bring it to our meetings on Friday night or send me a message and I'll be happy to clarify. Number 18 is isolating yourself when you feel upset or unwell. That gap is accepting and expressing all of your feelings as valid. When it's healed, that might look like using your feelings as a guide to help you to know when you're safe and when you're not safe. This person, when they're upset or unwell, believes they're always unsafe. But always unsafe isn't usually the case. So the triggered response you want to watch for is when you catch yourself withdrawing. So you can start looking at what you're doing, what you're thinking when you start doing that. Next one is planning for negative, having negative expectations about the future. And that developmental gap comes from not believing that you're safe. So you're missing the ability to self-soothe regarding safety. And if this is healed, you may be able to take things as they come and enjoy the moment. And so how do you know how to look for this trauma response? What are you looking for that will tip you off to know that you're in this trauma habit? Is when you find yourself expecting the worst. Next one is not letting anyone pay or putting you in a position where you might owe them. And this gap is trusting yourself to know who is trustworthy. So if this is healed, it might look like your ability to evaluate who's safe so you can develop mutually satisfying relationships, knowing that it's okay to give and take, and there's not going to be some heightened sense of you owing somebody something for friendship. So the triggered response you're going to be looking for is feeling fearful about what other people expect. Next one is justifying everything and only speaking up when you have receipts. The gap is the ability to trust yourself. If that's healed, you might find yourself feeling confident about your choices. And a trigger response that you would look for so you can start working on healing this is finding yourself planning to be able to defend yourself when you've made a decision. The next is considering sexual activity to repay men and thinking I owe them for basic human decency. So the developmental gap is being able to self-soothe and have a sense of self-esteem. Remember, being loved and knowing that you're good at something. So knowing you're good and lovable is what it looks like when it's healed, and knowing that thank you is enough. You don't owe anyone any more than that for basic human decency. So the triggered response that you want to look for to heal this is when you find yourself worrying about what other people expect of you. Number 23, finding yourself always on the defense and unable to be wrong, not being able to apologize. That developmental gap comes from not feeling worthy or good enough. So the piece of development you need is to develop a sense of worth and knowing that you're good. When you're healed, this might look like the ability to accept mistakes as learning opportunities. And the trigger response that you're going to look for is feeling embarrassed about making mistakes. Next one is being an obsessive checker, because you don't want to be called out publicly to be making a mistake and having a sense of shame and humiliation. Again, this is not feeling good enough. So developmentally, you need to be able to develop a strong sense of yourself. And if it's healed, looking at mistakes, recognizing them as something everybody does and giving yourself grace. And you might know this is on board. You find yourself checking obsessively and feeling fearful of other people's responses to you. Next one is excessive use of the words I'm sorry and taking blame for things that aren't your fault and still feeling a sense of guilt and shame. What's missing here is the ability to self-soothe and to allow other people to have responsibility for their own actions without you feeling guilt or shame. You'll know this is healed because it might look like being able to set healthy boundaries and allowing other people to experience their own consequences without you intervening. And you may know this is on board and you're in a triggered response if you find yourself saying you're sorry, feeling guilty too much, or feeling like a bad person. The next one is not crying in front of people, no matter what. The developmental gap is allowing all of your feelings and feeling comfortable with expression of feelings. This may look healed when you're able to appropriately allow yourself to cry, whether you're alone or with other people. And you may know that this trauma habit is on board because you're finding yourself refusing to cry or hiding to cry. Next is having bad anxiety about feeling like you're going to get in trouble. And this again goes back to the need to develop a sense of self-soothing and self-confidence. As it's healed, it might look like the ability to trust yourself to get things right or to learn from your mistakes. And you'll know that this trauma response is on board because you find yourself shutting down and worried about other people's responses. The next habit is thinking that you're really bad at keeping in touch with friends and having an unnatural detachment to people and not allowing yourself space to feel. This is the gap of finding yourself unable to give emotional support to others or to be able to receive it from others. You'll know that this is healed when you're able to develop and maintain supportive relationships and feel connected to other people. And you may know that this habit is on board when you find yourself shutting down and distancing yourself. Next one is being too detached so that you avoid abandonment, or getting really quickly attached, then find yourself feeling really scared that the person is going to abandon you. And again, the gap is the ability to soothe yourself, and you're missing the ability to be reliant on yourself emotionally. So when this is healed, it might look like taking the time you need to develop relationships, to know who is healthy and who's not, and having healthy relationships, boundaries, so that you're not getting attached too quickly. You may know you're in a triggered response when you find yourself getting too close too fast, or fantasizing about getting too close too fast. Next one is anxiety. When you perceive chaos around you and feel helpless to control. Again, what's missing is the developmental ability to self-soothe and to identify unsafe situations. If it's healed, you'll be able to stay calm appropriately and be able to recognize and choose safe situations and relationships. And you may know that this trauma habit is on board when you find yourself feeling anxiety or feeling trapped. Next one is saying, I could be wrong, but every time I try to discuss something, I know. So this is, again, not having self-confidence and not feeling good enough or lovable. You may know that this is healed because it may look like sharing your knowledge without worrying about how other people will respond. And you know that this trauma response is on board when you find yourself worrying about other people's opinions or worrying about rejection. Next one is staying dead calm, almost detached when everybody else is freaking out. The gap is staying present to feeling, especially feelings of stress or lack of safety. And so when we know that this is healed, we look like allowing feelings to motivate us to seek safety instead of staying in situations that are not good for us. And how you know this trauma response may be on board is when you find yourself shutting down. This habit, number 33, is the intense panic you need to get home whenever there's stress or too much loud noise. The problem is that there's no development of the feeling of freedom to actively seek safety when things feel too much. So everything starts feeling like too much. If this is healed, it might look like knowing how to manage your stress appropriately, knowing how to set healthy boundaries, and giving yourself permission to leave situations you find uncomfortable before you get panicked. You may know that this habit is on board because you start to feel panicky feelings. Next one is dissociation. The gap is the ability to seek safety. People dissociate because they are trapped in a situation where they're not able to find safety or soothe themselves until they can. You may know that you're healed when it might look like knowing the difference between recognizing something as a memory of a danger versus current danger. You know what's real, what's now. And having the ability to soothe yourself when the situation is not dangerous, even though your trauma brain may say that. And the triggered response that you're looking for to know this is on board is that out-of-body feeling that happens when people dissociate. Next one is doubting yourself, doubting your memory, wondering if you're crazy or delusional. And again, the gap is believing in yourself, trusting that you're lovable and that you're good at things. You may know that this is healed when you can recognize that the self-criticism isn't an accurate reflection of you. It probably comes from that mom who told you that you were delusional. You'll know that you're healed when you have the ability to heal your trauma responses. And this triggered response may be on board if you're dismissing your opinions or your memory. Next one is never picking. So it's never having a preference and just going with what everybody else wants and not having strong opinions. What's missing here is the developmental ability to be aware of your own needs and wants. You may know that this is healed when you know and speak what you need and want, and you can know that this trauma habit is on board when you find yourself excessively worrying about what other people want instead of knowing what you need. Number 37 is replaying conversations or texts in your head or thinking what you should or shouldn't have done, said, or wish you could have said something else, thinking the other person might be hating you. Again, missing here is the ability to self-soothe or to know that you're good enough and lovable. So if you notice, a lot of these are the ability to self-soothe, the ability to know that you're good enough and lovable. All of those come down to some of the very strong trauma responses that many of us have. You can have lots of different applications, but the ability to self-soothe and know that we're good and lovable is at the foundation. So when this one is healed, it may look like trusting yourself so that you don't have to replay all those conversations and text messages. And you'll know that this trauma habit is on board because you find yourself worrying about other people's judgment about what you may have said or done or texted. Next one is being able to completely compartmentalize when I'm extremely stressed, keeping going and going and going and not taking care of yourself. The gap is ability to self-regulate. Little kids don't want to go to sleep when it's time to go to sleep. When they have parents who enforce a schedule, they learn to self-regulate. The ability to seek rest is missing here too. If this were healed, it might look like having a healthy stress management plan in place, having realistic expectations for yourself, having good self-care and boundaries so that you can protect your good self-care. You may know that this trauma habit is on board when you find yourself overworking or finding yourself resistant to rest. Next one is food insecurity. And the developmental gap here is trusting yourself to provide for yourself and trusting your future to be safe and happy and healthy and with enough food. So if this is healed, it might look like being able to be prepared enough so that you know that you're going to be okay and not feeling fearful of future starvation. And you'll know that you're in this trauma response, that it's on board when you find yourself food hoarding. Finally, this one is about lying and not getting close emotionally to other people. So the lying actually contributes to the developmental gap of not being able to develop close emotional relationships. If it's healed, you'll find yourself telling the truth, trusting other people, and trusting yourself to be safe. Part of this process also means that you have to be able to tell the difference between safe people and unsafe people so that you don't have to lie to everyone to keep yourself safe. And you might know that you're in this trauma habit when you're finding yourself fearing judgment and punishment. So those are all of the trauma responses that we've been going through in the last couple of lessons. What is the developmental gap? What it might look like healed, and how to know that that trauma habit is on board. I hope you find that helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.